The Solitary Reaper opens with an observation by the poet of a Highland lass out in the countryside reaping and singing by herself. So she's out in the field in a meadow or paddock, and she's harvesting grain. And while she's doing that, she's singing a beautiful song. And so it begins with observation. And so it seems like it's a scene of isolation, and we're not quite sure why the poet's there or why the girl's there, and they seem like the only two beings on the earth at this point. So behold her single in the field, yon solitary Highland lass, reaping and singing by herself, stop here or gently pass. So the poet's not quite sure whether he should stay and observe or whether he should just keep moving on. Alone she cuts and binds the grain and sings a melancholy strain. So she's singing a very moving song. And the poet, oh listen, the exclamation there, he wants to hear more, for the vale profound is overflowing with the sound. So that rhyme tells us that the song is just carrying all through the valley there, and it's having a really profound effect on the environment. It's a song of beauty, and it really complements the natural world. And then the next stanza begins, no nightingale did ever chant or sing more welcome notes to weary bands of travellers in some shady haunt among Arabian sands. So the song and the observation of the poet leads to him using his imagination, and he transcends to different times and places. So this song could be sung years and years ago, in medieval times. It could be the story of the Arabian Nights in that sort of period as well. So that there's a lot of imagination and mystery and the Romantic period quite often does hark back to sort of medieval and exotic times, and that's what's happening here whilst the poet's observing this scene. A voice so thrilling ne'er was heard in springtime from the cuckoo birds. It was just reinforcing how beautiful the song was, breaking the silence of the seas among the farthest Hebrides. So the song has such an impact that everything else fades off into the distance. The rhetorical question, will no one tell me what she sings? And then he wonders of all these things. Perhaps a plaintive numbers flow for old, unhappy, far-off things. So it's a melancholy, sad song of times past and battles long ago. Or is it some more humble lay, familiar matter of today? So is she singing about something that is more relevant to the present? Some natural sorrow, loss or pain that has been and may be again. Perhaps he's now contemplating that it's a song of her own personal loss or a pain, something traumatic in her life, and this is why she's isolated. Whatever the theme, the maiden sang, as if her song could have no ending. I saw her singing at her weak, and over the sickle bending. I listened, motionless and still, and as I mounted up the hill, the music in the heart I bore, long after it was heard no more. So he doesn't need to understand the language or the sentiment of the song. He's transfixed by it, and I've put on the side there that really she's heavily invested. She's caught up and engrossed in that whole singing and the action of harvesting the grain. And this could be happening at any time or any place. So the whole scenario is timeless, and it's not dependent on someone cutting grain for them to have these feelings of sorrow or loss or a longing for things from time past. So she was singing as if her song could have no ending, and so this could be repeated all over the place. There's a universality to it. And it says here, and as I mounted up the hill, the music in my heart I bore, long after it was heard no more. So the last two lines of the poem is a rhyming couplet, and it emphasizes that the poet doesn't have to hear the music for it to have such an impact on him, and that it really does lead to transcendence. It has his immersion in nature and in the beauty of that song leads to a spiritual connection. And it's another example of the Romantic period where that observation and the ignition of the imagination leads to a feeling of enlightenment and connection with God. And so it's a nice little poem that does connect to other poems like I Wandered Lonely as a Cloud. So we've got that same thing that even when in times in the future, once the singing's been removed, and like in I Wandered Lonely as a Cloud, the poet doesn't need to see the daffodils, he just has to remember them, and he has that in his heart, and he can draw upon it and relive that experience. So we've got another example of the process of the poet being in a situation of isolation in nature, having that observation which triggers the imagination and leads to a spiritual and that word transcendental, the transcendence aspect of the experience.